He Cheng's breath was warm, but his words made one's heart cold. Hiding in the grand hall? A thought flashed, and Shilian instantly hugged He Cheng back. Of course, he wasn't hugging him because he was afraid. If there really was someone hiding there and they hadn't noticed, then that meant it was someone powerful. If that person should notice anything off, then they might be forced to make a move. Thus, if it was only He Cheng hugging him, being so intimate, then it would easily arouse suspicion. If both of them were embracing each other, then it might appear more normal. Shilian scanned their surroundings inconspicuously and whispered, "Where do you think that person is?" There was only one giant door to the grand hall, and that was where they had entered. It was completely empty within the hall. Nothing was out of place, and not even a stage or box for hiding anyone. Other than them, there were only the temple attendants that were turned into stone. The two whispered at the same time, "The shells." The insides of those stone people were all hollow, which meant that they served as hiding spots. Humans couldn't hide there, but ghosts certainly could. After confirming that fact, Shilian sensed something and looked up. When he saw a stone person about 6 meters behind He Cheng, his pupils shrank. That seemed to have been a young man who had a higher status and had been fairly calm. Since what these statues recorded were the deaths of the Wuyong people, most were hugging their heads wailing or curled into balls, and this was one of the very few who were standing. However, what made Shilian notice him wasn't his pose, but his face. Although the face was blurry, he could still see the face of that stone person. The left side was a crescent smile, and the right side was a crying face. Shilian blurted out, "It's that one." Then he pulled out his sword and struck, as He Cheng called out, "Gaga." That stone person was slashed into pieces, leaving broken fragments of the shell all over the floor. However, there was nothing inside. Shilian didn't dare to let it slide and turned over every piece of the shards. He Cheng caught his hand. "Gaga, what did you see just now?" Shilian picked up and showed him a few of the fragments. Sunlang, the stone person, his face was a white, no-faces mask. He Cheng's face changed slightly, but he still said, "Wait a moment." Then he gathered and put together all the pieces, reconstructing a complete face. When the two looked, they were silent. Just now, what Shilian had seen was clearly a half-crying, half-smiling demon mask. But this head that He Cheng had put together was simply a blurred face, not unlike the other stone statues. Was it a hallucination, or did he fall for an illusionment spell? Sitting around wouldn't get them answers, and the two searched all over the hall, smashing every stone person. After some thought, they felt that perhaps someone had rushed to climb the mountain before them. They decided not to stick around to wait for Peiming, and instead went straight toward the summit. The mountain of the body of the kiln seemed to have a peculiar gravity, grounding them and forbidding them from keeping light on their feet to fly. Thus, they could only climb by foot. The higher they hiked, the steeper the path became, and the colder the air grew. First, it was a thin layer. As they went up, the snow became thicker, and it could almost swallow half a boot. After 4 hours, the accumulated snow finally went past their knees, making climbing more and more arduous. Since they were walking non-stop, Shilian didn't feel cold and was instead covered with a thin sheen of sweat, his face powdery white with red cheeks. He wiped away his sweat with the back of his hand and looked back. about to talk to Hua Cheng, when suddenly his step fell hollow and his entire person dropped short by 2 feet. His body sank into the heavy snow. Thankfully, Hua Cheng had been following close behind him and quite naturally pulled him up. "Gogo, be careful." Shilin stood next to him and looked back to see where he sank. A large chunk of that spot had caved in, revealing a deep, dark hole leading to who knows where. If Shilin didn't grab hold of the edge in time, or if Hua Cheng moved too slow, then he would have fallen in for sure. Hua Cheng added, "There are many hollow ditches in this area. I still remember their general locations, so just follow close to me. Take your time and it'll be fine. Gogo walked too fast just now." So it turned out the body of the mountain beneath the snow was quite weak. There were large and small holes everywhere, but just how many and how deep was unknown. However, Hua Cheng actually remembered where they all were as they climbed. Shilin puffed a breath. "All right, let's stick closer together. We can't yell or make loud noises on a snowy mountain anyway, so if anything happens, it wouldn't be easy to call for help." Yet, unexpectedly, just as the words left his mouth, angry roars came from up ahead. "Are you done?" Which good brother dared to yell like this on such a steep and perilous snowy mountain? Shilin looked toward the sound, feeling dumbfounded. He saw that, within that world covered in snow, there were 2 little black dots currently in a brawl. One of them held a longbow, shooting arrows non-stop. The other held a saber, swinging it like a tiger, striking down every arrow. Both the blade and the arrows had a sheen of spiritual light. Both parties were shouting curses at the other, and that man holding the blade yelled, "I already said that little bastard wasn't killed by me. I'm looking for them too." It was Nanfeng and Fu Yao. Without going into why they were here too, Shilin was about to blurt out, "Shut up!" But then he reacted in time and swallowed it before he yelled too. If he roared the same way they did, and the 3 of them screamed at each other, how could all the snow on the mountain still be bound? Hua Cheng hugged his arms and cocked an eyebrow. Don't they know that yelling on a snowy mountain will cause an avalanche? They can't be that foolish, Shilin said. Maybe they know, but they're like that. When they're angry, they stop caring for anything. Nanfeng and Fu Yao were both extremely pissed off, cursing while fighting. But because they were too far away, their words were broken, and what they were fighting over couldn't be heard. And they completely did not notice that there were others who had come. Shilin wanted to rush up to pull them apart, but with the heavy snow dragging down his pace and the deep holes under, there was no way that he could quickly make it there to stop them. Shilin ran for 2 steps before he stepped into another hole, and he stopped. "We can't just let them keep fighting like this." Just as he said so, a silver butterfly flew by like a sharp arrow. Shilin was startled at first, but soon after, he relaxed. Good idea. If neither of them could make it there in time, then why not just let a wraith butterfly fly up and pass word first? That silver butterfly's speed was extremely fast, as expected, and it only took 3 shouts before it made it to the other side. However, before Shilin tried to pass word, he saw Hua Cheng's expression grew cold. He noticed something wrong and asked, "What's wrong?" The smile on Hua Cheng's lips had disappeared completely, replaced by a face that was as frigid as the snowy mountain. Shilin pressed, "Sun Lang, what's going on?" Hua Cheng's lips twitched and didn't answer before Shilin suddenly felt panic for some reason. He whipped his head around to look to the top, his eyes widening. Up ahead, by the snowy bluffs, a giant chunk of white mountain body trembled, then collapsed. On the other end, Nanfeng and Fu Yao, who were in the heat of the fight, also sensed the soundless pressure. Both looked up and finally noticed what was about to happen. The next moment, that mountain mass was like a 1,000-mile embankment. When it broke completely, carrying with it a wave of snow tsunami, rumbling and rolling as it pushed down toward them. They really caused an avalanche. Xilin grabbed Hua Cheng's hand, turned, and ran. But after making his first couple of steps, he remembered the other two further up ahead were much closer to the charging avalanche and stopped abruptly in his steps, looking back. Sure enough, the other two had ceased fire to flee together. Fu Yao didn't run very far before stepping into a hole, over half of his body sunken, and the snow buried over his chest. Nanfeng ran faster than him, but also looked back, hesitating for a moment, seeming to want to save him. However, that wave of snow had already attacked. The moment right before they were going to be swallowed, Xilin released Ruoya. That white silk bandage leapt out into the distance and took no time to accurately loop around Fu Yao and Nanfeng, yanking them up. Hua Cheng said darkly, "Gege, leave them. Don't bother." Xilin held onto Ruoya tightly, dragging the two as he ran. "I can't. They might fall into a hole and get buried by snow." "Too late," Hua Cheng said. "What? So fast?" Xilin exclaimed. He looked up, and that overbearing shadow came crashing down overhead. When Xilin turned back to save Nanfeng and Fu Yao, that moment he delayed allowed the wave of snow to swallow him whole. The cold and heavy wave of snow surged without rest, breaking him and Hua Cheng apart. Xilin was falling all over from the force, tumbling down with the white wave, but still managed to keep struggling somehow. However, there was too much snow, the surge too powerful, and time again covered over Xilin's head, bringing a series of sudden suffocations. In the end, Xilin shouted, "Sanlang!" He was unable to hang on and was buried down after all, disappearing within the icy snow current. An unknown amount of time had passed before the snowy mountain was finally calm. A good moment later, in that field of flattened snow, a hand suddenly burst out. This hand felt all around the snow, then an arm poked out, then a shoulder, then finally a head. Soon after, a person crawled out. He shook out his head and heaved a long sigh. It was Xilin. To forcibly dig himself out of that heavy layer of accumulated snow felt about the same as digging himself out of a grave. Xilin's face and hands were all red from frostbite, pretty much numb, but he only rubbed his face a couple of times before looking up, looking lost. In that blanket of whiteness, there was not a trace of red. However, Xilin couldn't just yell randomly either. If he caused another avalanche, then everything would be over. So he could only rise to his feet, walking aimlessly alone in that snowy world, and called out in a small voice as he walked, "Sanlang, Nanfeng, Fu Yao?" He was clearly going in the same direction that they were going before, but now it seemed to be much colder than when he and Hua Cheng walked together. Ruoya was also unwrapped from his hand. Xilin was puzzled. Ruoya shouldn't have unwrapped. Even if he let go, Ruoya would still bind itself to him. So what happened? He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what, and continued walking in a daze. Suddenly, from within the snowy winds ahead, someone had emerged. White robes, black hair, his sleeves flapping in the wind as he walked over slowly with his head down. Seeing this traveler, Shilin was delighted and went forward. "My friend, you..." But just as those words left his lips, that man looked up. On his face was a white and chilling mask, half of it smiling, the other half crying. It was like someone had stabbed him with a blade, and Shilin screamed. And after he screamed, he opened his eyes and shot up. It was only after taking in some harsh breaths before he shakenly noticed that, at that moment, he wasn't walking in the snowy mountain at all, but was lying in a dark, shadowy place. So it was a dream. No wonder, something always felt off in his dreams, and Shilin exhaled a long breath as he relaxed, wiping away the cold sweat on his forehead. After feeling things about for a bit, he found what was beneath him were rocks covered with a blanket of grass. Feng Xin hung at his waist, and Roya was clearly wrapped around his arm. Shilin steadied himself and ignited a palm torch, illuminating the place he was sitting in, calling out at first moment, "Sanlang, are you there?" Yet, unexpectedly, the moment the flames brightened the place, he instantly noticed that right next to him in the darkness, there stood another person, soundless and silent. This was no small surprise, and Shilin was instantly covered in sweat, his hand on Feng Xin immediately. That someone should be standing at such a close distance to him, there was no way he couldn't have noticed. However, when he looked closer, that cold sweat went away. It turned out it wasn't alive, but a stone statue. And it wasn't the same as those stone statues of the victims fallen in the volcano eruption. This was clearly a sculpture, and it was that of a divine statue. With the palm torch in hand, Shilin went around once and verified that the place he laid was a cavern. Within this cavern, a divine statue was erected and worshipped. Its pose elegant, the folds of its robes and flowing lines were all exquisitely sculpted. However, there was something peculiar. The face of this divine statue was covered by a light veil. That light veil flowed like mist. While it quite strangely covered the face of the divine statue, it wasn't ugly. Instead, it added a mysterious beauty. However, Shilin had never seen a heavenly official whose statues had faces covered. He reached out unconsciously to pull that light veil off when a voice came from behind. "Go, go." Shilin whipped around and saw at the entrance of the cavern there was a figure in red who had appeared out of nowhere. It was Huacheng. The face of that divine statue was instantly tossed to the back of his mind, and he rushed up. "Sanlang, thank goodness. I was just wondering where you were. Are you all right? Are you hurt? That avalanche just now was too sudden." Huacheng walked in. "I'm fine. How's Coco?" "Nothing is ever the matter with me," Shilin said. "What is this place?" After exiting the cavern, Shilin noticed that there was a long corridor outside. It didn't seem short, and who knew where it led to? It seemed that this was a fairly large underground space. Shilin was already used to Huacheng having the answers to everything. Yet this time, Huacheng replied, "I don't know. Most likely under the snowy mountain." Shilin was amazed, and here I thought it was a shelter Sanlang had found. "I can't believe that not even you know where this is." "No," Huacheng said. Well, this was a first. Huacheng had memorized where every ditch was on the mountain path, but he didn't know what this place was. This cave wasn't small either. Had he never discovered it before? Shilin couldn't help but feel a little perplexed and didn't press on, and instead raised his palm torch higher. How did we get here? Ho Chang also summoned a few silver butterflies, letting them flutter about with faint light, and replied softly, Maybe we all made a misstep and fell through a ditch. It can't have been someone who put us here intentionally. Hearing him say so, Shilin couldn't help but recall that dream he had just now, and a slight chill went down his spine. Recalling another thing, he asked, We're here, then where's Nanfeng and Fu Yao? Ho Chang replied unsympathetically, Probably buried in the snow. Who cares? They're heavenly officials. This won't kill them. Shilin didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Even if this won't kill them, if no one can help dig them out, it doesn't feel great to be buried for a few decades. Maybe they've fallen in here too. Let's search for them. Oh, by the way, Sunlong, when your silver butterfly went forward earlier, what did you hear them say? Ho Chang snickered. It's just meaningless arguments. What else can it be? Shilin didn't think it was that simple. Otherwise, Ho Chang's sudden change of expression when that wraith butterfly flew over couldn't be explained. Even now, while Ho Chang was snickering, his eyes were unkind. However, if he wasn't going to tell, then Shilin wasn't going to ask. The two walked along the long corridor of the stone cave. Only having walked for a while, did they discover that the formation of the stone cave underneath the snow was much more complex than they thought. It wasn't just the one path going all the way. There were many forks in the road going to various other caverns, big and small. Within every cavern there was a divine statue, some tall, some short, some boyish, some youthful. The robes were ever-changing, the poses all different, reposing, standing, sitting composedly, sword-wielding, dancing, all sorts. The level of skill was different too. Some of the sculpting work was rough and unrefined, while others were so extraordinarily exquisite they could be called otherworldly. They probably weren't all sculpted by the same person. As Shilin looked along the way, he couldn't help but exclaim in awe, This place is a cave of 10,000 gods. The one who built this cave must be an incredibly devout believer. However, all the divine statues had the same peculiarity. All of their faces were covered by a light veil. Some had their entire bodies covered, exceedingly strange. Shilin really was quite curious and wanted to pull off the veil of one of the divine statues to see its face, but Ho Chang spoke up behind him. Guga, I suggest you don't. Shilin looked back and asked, Why not? I think these statues are a bit weird. Ho Chang approached him and explained, It's precisely because it's weird that it's best if you don't. If this face was covered, then there's a reason why it's covered. The head is the place where a person's spiritual energy is gathered. So if the veil is removed, who knows what would happen with all the spiritual energy gathered by these weird statues. His speech sounded pretty out there, but it made sense. If the veil was removed and woke something within those statues, then things wouldn't be funny anymore. Shilin contemplated, then dropped his hand in the air. I was only curious which deity this is, that's all. Ho Chang said lightly. This is the kingdom of Wuyong, so it's probably the crown prince of Wuyong. Nothing amazing. However, Shilin said, I don't think so. Oh, what do you mean? Ho Chang asked. Shilin gazed at him. From all the murals we've seen along the way, The style of dress of the Crown Prince of Wuyong and the people of Wuyong are very different from the style of dress of these divine statues. So, I think these statues probably have nothing to do with the Crown Prince of Wuyong. In fact, this might not have been sculpted by someone of Wuyong. Hua Cheng smiled brightly at him. Is that right? Ge really has an eye for detail. Xilin also smiled. Nah, whether it be the sculpting, the dress, the details in which the flowing lines are carved, they all look more the style of the later periods. For example, Xianle's style. Hua Cheng raised his brows. It seems Ge is also deeply gifted in this area. Now, one would gain some knowledge after seeing so much of something like statues. It's nothing, Xilin said. Although he couldn't quite put his finger on it, his instincts told him that since earlier, there had been something off about Hua Cheng. And after having talked to this point, Hua Cheng was starting to become subtly nervous.